Wonderful. Thanks so much, Beck. I do apologize if I'm looking multiple directions. I have multiple screens here, so I'm not ignoring you if I'm looking in the other direction. Really happy to be here at this webinar this afternoon to talk about part-time doctorates and how you can be more successful in them. I'll give you a little bit of a story about how I got here as the session moves on. But it's just worth stating at the beginning, this is going to be an interactive session. I'm not going to talk at you for an hour, because actually how you make a part-time doctorate successful is by reflecting on where you are now and what actions you can take to move yourself forward. So it's going to be a very, very action-focused session. I know we have lots of part-time doctoral students in this session and probably watching the recording. I also know some colleagues that have doctorates and have been through the process as well. So when we're doing the activities, if you've already got your doctorate, maybe think back to your own journey or think about some of the students you supervise and how this might be useful for that side of things. Okay, so why am I even talking about part-time doctorates? How am I the person that's sitting here and doing this? Well, this all came out of a book that myself and Dr. Kay Guccione wrote a couple of years ago. Kay is the head of research culture and researcher development at the University of Glasgow. And we came at this book from two very, very different angles. Mine was quite personal to start with. So I did a part-time doctorate, and I'll tell you about my doctorate on the next slide. But Kay's come from it for a very different angle, because she spends most of her time developing supervisors and supporting supervisors to better supervise doctoral students. So we kind of came to this book from actually, what do supervisors need, what do students need, and how do we bring that together across a whole range of subjects, perspectives, and voices. And what we've tried to do with this book is not just give my advice, not just give Kay's advice, not just draw on the literature, but also weave in the stories of lots of successful doctoral students throughout their journeys to really bring in their experience and expertise and what they've learned from the process. So this book, although it's written by myself and Kay, it really is kind of a collection of lots of stories of people from very, very different backgrounds. So if you're doing your doctorate in a more STEM-based subject, there's something for you in there. If you're more arts and humanities, there's something in there for you. Or if you're social sciences like myself, there's definitely something in there for you. So what do I know? Why me? Well, I've been a part-time student, I say for over a decade on this slide. It's coming up to 15 years now. I started with one module at the Open University many years ago, and I still don't seem to be able to stop. But there's something about having studied part-time, having researched part-time for a number of years, where you start to build up strategies. And when I was doing my own part-time doctorate at Staffordshire, I would, alongside other students who'd never done part-time study before, and they found it really, really difficult juggling everything. And I thought, well, this is just what I've done for many years, which made me think, actually, what are those strategies I've developed? How have these things worked? And why was I successful? And how could I maybe pass this on to some other people? A doctorate is hard. I think anyone that does a doctorate will tell you they are a challenge. If they were easy, everyone would have a doctorate. But I think part-time doctorates are particularly hard because of the amount of life that happens during a part-time doctorate. So if you think of maybe a full-time doctorate that takes 3 to 4 years in an ideal world, it's quite self-contained. When your part-time doctorate kind of stretches to 6, 8 years, there's a lot more opportunity for life to happen. I think the other thing is people come to part-time doctorates maybe slightly later in their life or later in their career, at which point you've got multiple caring responsibilities coming in. You might have children you're looking after, but you might also be looking after aging parents at the same time, which adds so much more complication. And put in there the fact that you're working, there can be complications around work. So during my own part-time doctorate, I lost my dad to cancer. And I experienced redundancy from a role that was quite key to the subject I was researching. So I had lots of life happen. And I suppose it's just worth saying, you can't always plan for what life is going to happen, but what you can do is plan strategies to help you get through that successfully. And that's some of what I'll be talking about today. Since doing my doctorate, I've been working at the Open University for a few years as a lecturer. I supervise a doctorate of education students, and I've done lots of workshops like this across the whole of the UK and some global sessions like this with lots and lots of doctoral students. We also spoke to lots of doctoral researchers during the book. So we've got lots of perspective that's coming into the things that I'm going to talk about today. So this isn't a sales pitch for the book, but I'd be remiss of telling you what's not telling you what's in the book. It takes a kind of chapter by chapter structure, really taking you through your journey. So we start in chapter 1 with talking about what part-time doctorates are. And you might think, well, I'm already doing a part-time doctorate. I don't need to know about this. But what I found through talking to lots of students is they weren't aware of the different types of doctorates other students they were talking about are doing. So if you're doing a traditional PhD, for example, you might not know what a doctorate in education looks like and what's different. So we thought we'd have a chapter in the beginning so everyone can understand the different types of doctorate that people they talk to might be doing. Chapter 2 is about drawing a map and thinking about your journey through your doctorate. And we envisaged that people could use this at the beginning of their journey. So I see that Mark's just about to start his doctorate, so that's going to be really relevant to you, Mark. But actually, it's a really useful chapter to work through, even if you're partway through your journey, to think about how far you've come and where you've still got to go. Then there's a chapter on identity. I think identity is really important. I'm going to come up against this during the rest of the webinar. But balancing your identities as a part-time doctoral researcher can be really challenging because you've got an identity as a doctoral researcher. You've got an identity potentially in your work environment. You've got an identity in your personal environment. And sometimes we have to juggle all of these things together, and that can be really challenging. Then we've got chapter 4, which is about working with your supervisors. And there's a number of activities within that chapter that you can actually work through with your supervisor. One of the things that Kay talks about a lot when working with supervisors is actually quite often where tensions are with doctoral students is in communication. So there's actually an activity in that chapter to actually work through with your supervisor to work out how to communicate best at a distance, which again, we identified as being a real issue for part-time doctoral researchers. There's also a chapter on managing your project. This isn't a project management chapter. Don't worry, we're not going to send you down Prince 2 and thinking about how you can kind of make your project into a Gantt chart. But it's thinking about how you make your project fit within your life and how you get done what you need to do in the times you've got available. Then there's a chapter about finding balance. That's thinking about how you balance your doctorate with everything else going on. I'm sure that resonates with lots of people in this room, how many things you're trying to juggle. And sometimes it can be tempting just to do nothing apart from do your doctorate, work and sleep. But that's not sustainable and that doesn't lead to positive outcomes. So that chapter is thinking about how you can build that balance within your doctorate. Chapter 7 is one of my personal favorites, and we'll be talking a little bit more about this during the webinar today, this idea of building a village. Being a doctoral student can be really isolating. And I think building a support network around yourself is really challenging when you're part-time sometimes. So we've kind of got some suggestions of ways you might do that and who might be in that support network. I think it's much harder for part-time doctoral students who may not be on campus as much or may not be in the presence of actual people to ask questions to almost feel like you're on your own and you've got nobody to help you. Whereas if you're on a campus as a doctoral student, you can have to go and knock on someone's door and go, how do I do this thing I'm stuck with? As a part-time doctoral student, you might need to build those villages in a slightly different way. And then the final chapter of the book is actually thinking about what you do following your doctorate, which I'm sure will be useful for all of you at some point in time. As I said, it's a kind of very, very action-focused book, as you'll realize from this webinar as well. We don't like to tell you lots of things. We like you to go and find things out for yourself. And there's a whole range of activities in the book, and this kind of just gives you a flavor of what they are. But I suppose the book is only one part of what we've done with this project. And we have a blog called thrivingparttime.com. We were really mindful when we were writing this book that there were only so many different perspectives that we could get into a short volume. And there are lots of people doing lots of different types of doctorates in lots of different contexts, whose stories also are important and who might be able to share some expertise they have that we didn't manage to capture in the book. So this is a living blog. We are really open to taking more submissions to it. So if anyone feels an urge to write something for it because they don't feel themselves represented on the blog or in the book, please do. We'd love to hear from you. It's also a really supportive way to get something published if you've not gone through that part of a process before. Both myself and Kay peer review all the posts. So it's a really supportive way to have your first go at getting something published if you haven't already. But do have a look at the blog and do consider submitting something if you'd like to. Okay, so the rest of this section of the webinar is going to think about your journey so far, where you've got to where you are, and kind of what that's been like, and whether it was what you expected, I suppose. So first little bit of interaction. You can do this one in the chat. If you're watching the recording, just maybe think about which of these images represents your journey so far. So we've got 4 images here. We have image A, which is a stone path going through a field, leading up to some mountains. It's a really clear path where we can see what's going on. We have image B, which is a load of train lines at a junction crossing over each other, looking quite confusing and complex. That's all I'll say about that image. Image 3, which is a kind of snowy mountain with a path going through the snow that somebody's kind of made, but then other people have trodden down that path as well, but it's not quite as clear a path as A. And then image D, which is an atoll. So it's a series of little islands that are connected underneath the ocean, that almost look separate, but if you look carefully, you can see how they're all connected. Which of those resonates most with you? I can see we've got quite a few in the chat box. So I think A maybe what we expect a doctoral journey to be like. We think it's going to be a nice path we're going to follow, don't we? I think when we all write a proposal for doing a doctorate, we have a really clear plan of what we're going to do, and I just need to follow those steps over the years I'm going to do it. And it never quite works out like that. B, I think, is the most common one we get in all these workshops we run. Lots of people talk about it feeling a bit chaotic and not knowing what's going on. C is also a common one. Interesting, we haven't got quite as many C's today, because I think when you're doing a doctorate, especially in a new area, you are kind of almost treading a path for a first time, aren't you? So quite often when we talk to STEM researchers, they talk a lot about C, that they kind of know roughly where they're going to go, but they've got to tread their own path. D is one we rarely get, but it's the one that resonates with me. So it's really interesting that a few of you have put that in there. Because I think a lot of the time you feel like you're on that little island on your own. But actually, if you stop, reflect backwards and look out, you realize you're connected to lots of other people. And hopefully that's why it resonated with some of you. So just to reassure you, if your journey does feel like C, this is okay. A doctorate is about creating new knowledge. So sometimes we do have to create our own path. It might not always be smooth, as it says here, and it might not be the same path as someone else. You can see in this snow, there's people that have gone slightly off the track, and that's absolutely okay. So if you feel like you have to create your own path, that's absolutely fine and normal. But I want to go back to image B, because I think image B is a really important one, and lots of you put that in the chat, which is interesting. Just in the chat box, what do you see when you see this image? What are the first things that come to your mind? Options. Now, I want to give you a slightly different perspective on this, because we're all looking at this as, I think, in this room, probably nobody that does work as a train signaller, but we're looking at this as a load of train tracks, and there are options. We're not quite sure what we do with it. If you were a train signaller looking at this, it would be lovely, logical, ordered. It would make sense. You'd know which switches to flick to go down particular tracks, because you understand the system that you're working within. And I think that's why I think this is a really important image to think about, because actually once you've got that knowledge of how it works, this thing that looks maybe complex becomes a lot simpler. And really that's one of the messages that I'm going to talk about a bit today, is sometimes it's about understanding that complexity and all the kind of things you've got to juggle to help your journey look more logical, maybe less complex than you think it's going to be once you understand those kind of hidden bits of the curriculum, I suppose. But it's always good to think forward a little bit. So no matter what your path through your doctorate looks like, however challenging it is at times, the outcome is the same. At some point, you will complete your thesis, you will become a doctor. I will guarantee that everyone will get there eventually. Sometimes it's just not as smooth as you would like it to be. So we've all got the same destination on these journeys, but you've probably got many, many different reasons for going on that journey. For me, I decided I wanted to do a doctorate because I was working in a professional services role in a university. I wanted to move into the academic side and to do research. So for me, I was really interested in developing those skills in research so I could move my career sideways. For some of you, you may have very different answers here. And I really want you to stop and pause for a minute and think about what you want from your doctorate. This is going to be different for all of you. And we're going to do this in kind of a little bit of a structured way. So I would like you to, on a piece of paper, on your phone, whatever you have handy, to write down your 3 main reasons for doing a doctorate. Okay, so just write down your 3 main reasons. I'm going to go silent for a moment, just to give you a chance to reflect on that and pop them down. If you've already done your doctorate, maybe write down the 3 reasons you thought you wanted to do a doctorate in the first place, because that could be interesting to reflect upon. Okay, so what I'd like you to do is pick one of those and share it in the chat, whichever one your most important one is. If you don't feel comfortable sharing it, please don't feel you have to. But if you'd like to share your most important one in the chat, or if you want to share all 3, do feel free. It's also really important sometimes to share that with your supervisors. If they understand why you're doing a doctorate, it can be really helpful for them to keeping you when you lose your motivation, to get you back on that track, to remind you of that why, because it can be really easy to forget some of these whys that underpin what you're doing. So just to kind of elaborate on what I was saying there, if we understand why we're doing something, it's easier to make the how and what fit. So to be a doctor or write a thesis is what you're doing it for. So really just have a look back at those lists you've been writing and think about how many of your reasons actually start with that why. Or do you maybe need to go back to your list and add a new reason that starts with the why as well? Just something to reflect upon for yourself, because I think thinking about that can be really helpful. If you've not come across the work of Simon Sinek, I really recommend having a look at him on YouTube. He's got some TED Talks up there, or one of his books on Audible, if you like audiobooks, or his books. He talks about the power of why, and he talks about this in a business context a lot. But I think there's a lot of transferability to think about motivation for doing something like a doctorate, how you build that deep motivation beyond just focusing on the what you're doing and how you're doing it. Because it's a lot easier, as Simon Sinek says, I'm going to paraphrase this really badly, it's a lot easier to ignore a what than it is to ignore a why. So having those whys can be really, really powerful for you. Okay. Because I asked you to think about your motivations, which can be really challenging. I now want you to think about your thesis that you're writing. And I want you to think about why the world needs your thesis. This is a really difficult question. I make no apologies at this point in time. And I'm going to give you, again, a couple of minutes just to reflect on this and to write something down. See if in a sentence you can encapsulate why the world needs the thesis you're going to write. If you're far down the journey, you might be somewhere towards that thesis and you might have a really concrete idea. If you're starting at the beginning of this journey, you might still be at the ideas phase and not actually know what your thesis is going to look like. But why does the world need the research that you're doing to practice? So just something to kind of muse on. I'm sure you'll come back to these thoughts at some point in time. You'll probably wake up at 2 a.m. one day thinking about what am I doing? That's completely normal. But I suppose we could take a little bit of a shift now from the reasons behind your journey onto kind of the actual journey itself. I told you this was going to be a bit of a whistle-stop session, didn't I? I'd love to give you answers to all of these questions. That's not what this session is about. This session is about thinking about how you can kind of prepare yourself best for what you're doing. Think back to those images of the roads, of the paths and things. Sometimes you can't plan for what you're doing, but actually things like maps, guidebooks help you on journeys, don't they? You may have never been to somewhere before, but if you read a good guidebook, you have an idea of what to expect. And actually this is what we can think about, is how do we build our own guidebook for our doctorate in some ways? Because I say you will ever only ever do one doctorate, so how can you avoid the pitfalls? I know there's at least one person in here that's on their second doctorate, so not always true. You may do multiple doctorates, but I can guarantee that your second doctorate will not look exactly like your first. Every doctoral journey is slightly different. But sometimes to understand what the pitfalls might be, you need to speak to other people and find out what their journeys were like. That can be really, really important and really helpful. This is why sessions with other doctoral researchers like this one, like the network you're a part of, are really, really important, because that peer support at various different levels, whether it's someone who's completed their doctorate, whether it's someone who supervises doctorates, whether it's someone who's just maybe a little bit further along the journey than you, is really, really important, because it can actually help you on that process. As I said on the slide, you can't recce your own doctorate. You can't do an advanced planning and see what the journey is going to look like and then do it. You just have to follow it as you go. But one thing that can be really helpful is to find people who've gone where you want to go before you. And that doesn't mean they have to have done the entire process. But say you're coming up to an upgrade piece of paperwork and you're getting really stuck with it. Who's been through upgrade recently? Is there someone that can kind of give you those tips that you don't know about? Is there someone that's presented at a conference you're going to present at before that can give you a bit of insider knowledge of what the audience is like? It's those little bits of knowledge that can be really, really valuable to help you on your doctoral journey and kind of reduce some of the anxieties you might have along the way. I'm going to date myself with this next slide. Can anyone identify where this image is from? This is where we find out who's a similar generation. I really like this image because if you've ever played any of these sorts of games, role-playing type games on a computer, there's often lots of people you have to go and find, and they'll give you bits of information or they give you tools you can take with you to help you on your way. And I think that's a really nice analogy for thinking about the support you need on a doctorate. There isn't one person who's going to give you all the tools you need or all the answers. I think sometimes as doctoral researchers, we think our supervisor is going to tell us everything we need to know. And that's not true. There are lots of people that know far more about different things than your supervisor and can tell you that information in a much easier way than your supervisor. So you have to almost build a network of people to help you and support you. Some of that network is in this room. Some of the network may be in your universities. There may be other networks. We're going to do this really quickly in the chat box. Just a quick fire. How many different people can you think about who could help you on your journey? So not specific names of people, but different roles. So obviously you've got your supervisor. You might have someone who works in the graduate school. Any other thoughts? Pop them in the chat box. Let's see if you get any of my magical list while you're going through this. Person say librarian. Librarians are the most invaluable people that exist. If you don't know who your research librarian is in your university, go and find out straight away. They can offer you so much support, and so many people don't use them when they're doing doctorates, and it really makes me sad because they are often like gold dust, especially when you're looking for bits of literature you can't find. Other PhD boards, wider personal learning network, I'm guessing that is. Yep, brilliant. Research admin staff, wonderful, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. People who've done doctorates later in life can be really helpful. Finding people that have done part-time doctorates and have got through that journey is a really important thing. Your supervisors may have done full-time doctorates and might not understand some of the challenges you face. So having people in your support network that get it and you don't have to explain some of that too can be really useful. AI, potentially, it can have its uses in limited ways within the regulations of your university. I add as a caveat before someone shoots me on that one. Yep, other people on your PhD journey. I'm going to share a list on the slide. There are a few that haven't come up. Research impact managers are one that I would have never thought of before we were working on this list. But actually thinking about those of you that are trying to make a difference with your research, actually understanding that trajectory from doing research to it having an impact can be really, really valuable in the way you frame your thesis and the way you think about your publication plan. So knowing who they are can be really helpful. Public engagement specialists, if you want to talk about your research more widely. Data managers, people in sort of services that help you kind of work out how to manage your data can be really important, especially if you have to write things like data management plans and you want your data available in a kind of repository, really important. Disability advisors, academic skills writing facilitators. You know, you've got a supervisor supervising your academic skills, but actually maybe your writing isn't where you want it to be. Your supervisor might not be the person to support you in that, but there are absolutely people in your universities who are geared up to do that. So do make sure you know who they are. Learning technologists, those sorts of staff where you're trying to make things work in your thesis is really important. IT help desks, absolutely. I can guarantee you when you get to the stage where you want to submit your thesis, you will try and do something in Word and it will completely mess up all your formatting. Knowing who you can speak to when you're having that panic is worth gold dust to stop you crying under your desk. I say this because actually having this really wide support network means when things do go wrong, you've got someone you can call upon rather than panicking and going, how do I cope with this thing that's suddenly become kind of, you know, the thing that's consumed my life. You actually go, hang on, I know someone that can help me with this. And that's one of the things, actually maximizing your time to reduce that anxiety can be really important. It's not just about getting support from other people, but it's about providing mutual support. We do all need people to bounce ideas off, to help reassure us, which I think has come up in the chat, to collaborate and share our ideas. Remember, there are other doctoral students you're going to meet along your journey. They're going to be your colleagues in the future. And actually, there's a lot of people I met during my doctorate that I now write things with, I now do research with, I now do bits of work with. So you're building your networks for the future, which I think is really, really important. Relationships should be symbiotic. So it shouldn't just be you going to someone else to get help from them. It's actually, what can you both bring to that relationship? And I'm sure some of you are sitting there going, but I'm a novice researcher, I've got nothing to bring, I just need help. You all have lots of skills to bring. You're all experts in different things. I'm guessing most people in this room are in some kind of paid employment or have some experience of working in paid employment that probably have skills that are really helpful for other people. I always share the anecdote of a colleague I was talking to. He was talking about a doctoral student who was struggling to complete his thesis. And he was like, I just don't know how to juggle all these things I've got to do. And she was like, well, just treat it like a project, you know, plan out your steps, write a Gantt chart. And he just laughed at her. And she said, why are you laughing? And he said, do you know what my day job is? I'm a project manager. And he'd never used those skills that he has in his day job of being an expert to transfer across to his doctorate. And I think, you know, that's an individual person not transferring the skills, but you might have really good skills that can support someone else that's really panicking about how they manage their project if you're a project manager in your day job. Likewise, you know, some of you might spend a lot of your day job writing things. I might have some really good skills at proofreading or helping people articulate their ideas. So again, trying to identify what skills you have and how you might share them is really, really valuable. As it says on this slide, what are you an expert in? I'm not going to spend too much time dwelling on this, but this is something I really do recommend that you might go away from this session and just spend a little bit of time mapping out. Thinking about all the things you're good at and what you might be able to bring to some of your networks that you're working with. Because I think knowing what you can bring helps you not feel like you're a burden on other people sometimes. And actually kind of building that mutual support can be really, really valuable. But I would say the most important person in your support village is a critical friend. Just interest out in the chat box. Does anyone have a critical friend? Yep, fantastic. Critical friends are really important. You need a critical friend, as it says here, that will offer you supportive yet challenging advice. What you don't want is just someone saying, yeah, you're brilliant, you're the best person ever, you're really good at this, you're amazing. Having a cheerleader is lovely, but it's not helpful. Sometimes you need someone that kind of calls you out on your BS sometimes, you know, really, you know, I think you might be in the wrong here. Sometimes having that is really useful. They can give you a sense of perspective. especially when you're dealing with challenging feedback, maybe from your supervisors or reviewers on a paper that you've submitted, and they give you kind of an external perspective without the emotion you might have. I think they're really, really valuable. If you're trying to be a good critical friend, you need to listen as much as you speak. It's not about giving people answers sometimes, but sometimes it's about giving them the space to actually think through talking, by asking questions rather than actually offering answers to their situation. And that's absolutely brilliant to hear, Rob. There's lots of relationships like this within the GoGN network. That's really brilliant to hear. I think it's worth saying that your critical friend doesn't have to be an expert in what you're doing. I have critical friends who are academics in completely different subject areas, but sometimes it's someone that understands enough about what you're doing to give you a different sense of perspective. If you don't already have a critical friend, though, do look in your networks to see who you can find. Okay, so I'm going to move swiftly into the last section of this session, which is saying that it's not just about the thesis. I know we get really hung up on this thing we've got to write at the end of our doctorate, and that's the thing that's going to be examined, and there's a viva as well, but actually thesis and the viva is what matters. And actually it's not just about that, because you need to get to the end of your doctorate in one piece. And if you just spent the entire time staring at a thesis, you wouldn't get to the end in one piece. Within the book, we talk about this, which we call the on-fire triangle. I'm sure some of you will remember the fire triangle from back when you were a young child, that we have our heat, we have our fuel, and we have our oxygen that make a fire work. And if you move any of those, the fire goes out. Well, this is really what we're talking about with the on-fire triangle, is you're juggling three things. You're juggling a work life, a personal life, and a doctoral life. And if one of these goes out of balance, you kind of lose your spark. And thinking about how you can keep them all in balance is really, really important. That doesn't mean the balance is going to be the same all the way through your journey, but it means across your journey, you might need to think about how you're going to balance these things together. Certainly, as you get towards submission of your thesis, your doctoral life is probably going to consume more of you than it might have done before. But really making sure there is space in your time for balance is really, really important. And finding what that balance means for you. I do a lot of running. I'm not going to tell everyone you should all go out and run while you're doing your doctorate. Running is not for everyone, but it's finding your running. That might be knitting. It might be doing a crossword. It might be, watching some really bad, trashy TV. What kind of re-energizes you, but having that distance away sometimes actually makes you more productive when you're actually focused on that doctoral work. Incidentally, I think one of the real benefits of being part-time, which we talk about a little bit in the book, is the fact that you don't stop thinking about your doctorate. And that can be a blessing and a curse. But if you're full-time, you've got a set number of years you've got to get that project finished, and that's how long you're thinking about it. When you're doing 6 to 8 years for a part-time doctorate, you've got 6 to 8 years of thinking time. That's almost double the thinking time a full-time student has. And that sometimes gives you more time to percolate those ideas. So when you do have time to actually do the writing and focus on the research, you've maybe had more time to think through some of these ideas. But do think about that on-fire triangle. Maybe have a pause after the session and think about where you are at the moment. Is there bits of this that is dominating slightly more than others, and how might you get some of that balance back? Okay. So that kind of leads me to my final point, which is what are you going to do now as a result of this session? I said my sessions always focus on action. Hopefully there's something you can take from today's session that you're going to go and do following this talk. Is it maybe going to look at your reasons why you're doing your doctorate? Is it maybe thinking about, refining that sentence of what your doctorate is about? Is it about maybe going to think about this on-fire triangle and what you need to balance? You don't need to share these actions, but it would be great if you could write something down that you're going to do next time. And this might have sparked some conversations you want to have with your supervisors. So maybe this has sparked you thinking, oh, maybe I need to have this conversation about communication, or maybe I want to ask them something that I've thought about in this session. So do make sure you write down an action and think about that. And that leaves us a few minutes for any questions.